Good afternoon. I apologize. We're going to start just a couple minutes late. We're going to wait one more minute, maybe two, for people next door who are finishing their lunch, because there was a bit of shift work in there to find a spot to sit and have your lunch. So we'll just be about another 1 or 2 minutes, and then Mr. Rifkin will get underway. Thanks. All right, well, good afternoon, and welcome to the luncheon session at the World Hydrogen Energy Conference. We're delighted to have you here. There were 600 of the delegates here who took out tickets to hear Mr. Rifkin at today's event, which is somewhat of a record for us, and we're very pleased with that turnout and your interest. Jeremy Rifkin's the president of the Foundation on Economic Trends, and many of you will know his work already. He's the author of 19 books on the impacts of scientific and technological changes on the economy, the workforce and society, and the environment. His most recent book, The Third Industrial Revolution, actually is for sale outside for those of you who are interested. And he's very kindly actually agreed and has done a lot of signing for us already, so there's some signed copies there. Jeremy's been an advisor to the European Union for the past decade. He advised the government of Spain during the its presidency of the European Union in 2010, and served as an advisor to President Sarkozy of France, although I'm not sure it helped Mr. Sarkozy in the end. There were some limitations on Jeremy's ability to influence the electorate, I guess. He's also advised Chancellor Merkel in Germany and Prime Minister Socrates of Portugal, the Prime Minister of Spain and of Slovenia during their respective European Council presidencies. And he currently advises the European Commission, European Parliament, and several EU heads of state. He's the principal architect of the document, the European Union's Third Industrial Revolution, their long-term economic sustainability plan, and it was formally endorsed by the European Parliament in 2007 and now being implemented by various agencies in the EU. He's also a founder and chairperson of the Third Industrial Revolution Global CEO Business Roundtable, which has 100 of the world's leading renewable energy companies and architectural firms and IT companies, power and utility companies, transport and other companies involved in it. And since 1994, he's been a senior lecturer at Wharton's School of Executive Education program at the U of Pennsylvania. He writes a monthly column on global issues that appears everywhere, in the Los Angeles Times, The Guardian in the UK, in Germany, in Belgium, in L'Espresso in Italy, El Mundo and El Pay in Spain, and even in Greece and Denmark. So Mr. Rifkin's been quite influential in his own way in shaping the public policy discussion around renewable energy, and he's been a great advocate for the hydrogen sector and consideration of hydrogen in future public policy plans. He holds a degree in economics from Wharton and a degree in international affairs from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts, and speaks frequently before government, universities, and public bodies like this. So I'd ask you to welcome, please, today, Jeremy Rifkin. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm going to start on a very somber note. hope it'll end up being somewhat of a liberating reflection. What we're facing here on this planet now is not simply an economic crisis. We're facing a species crisis. This atmosphere on this planet has never experienced more than 250 parts carbon per million in the last 1 million years. All right? Last 1 million years, geological record shows we've never gone over 250 parts carbon per million. Now recall that our species is the youngest species here on the planet. We're the babies. We've been here 175,000 years. Beginning with the industrial age, we began to see the CO2, the industrial-induced methane, the nitrous oxide go up, and we went to 300 parts carbon per million. And then we went to 350 parts carbon per million. Now, let me let you in on a little story. I advised the European Union. We went to Copenhagen, and we were hoping to talk the world into mitigating CO2 at 450 parts per million. That's it, no further, with the thought that we would go up 2 degrees. That's devastating, 2 degrees, but we might survive. Then James Hansen threw us a curve in Brussels. James Hansen is the chief climatologist, as many of you know, for the United States government. He's the head of the NASA Goddard Space Institute. And he said to us in the EU, you've got your numbers wrong. He took a team of scientists down into the oceans. They looked at the geological record, and they said, if we mitigate at 450 parts per million, and no one wants to do that except the EU, we don't go up 2 degrees. And I want every parent in this room to hear this. We go up 6 degrees Celsius in this century, and to paraphrase Dr. Hansen, the end of human civilization as we've come to know it. Last week, the devastating news reported by the scientific community, the current readings in the Arctic, we have now tipped over 400 parts per million, way ahead of schedule on the models. This is devastating. Devastating. We've had 2 events in the last 4 years that I believe signal the beginning of the end game for the great industrial revolutions based on fossil fuels. The first event, July 2008, let me take you back to that month. Crude oil hit $147 a barrel on world markets in July of 2008. And when that happened, all the other goods and services across the entire global supply chain went through the roof. Because this whole civilization is built off the carbon deposits of the Carboniferous age. If we survive as a species, and I think it's a question at this point, I try to remind myself, what would future generations think of us in 500,000 years from now? They'll look back at us and they'll say, oh yes, they were the oil people. We had the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. These people lived off the carbon deposits of the Carboniferous age, and they created a brilliant, exciting, short-lived civilization that almost took us to the brink. So when oil started to go over $100 a barrel in 2007, all the other prices went up on the supply chain, because it's not just that we use energy to move the system, energy is embedded in all the products. Petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides. All of our construction materials virtually are made out of petrochemicals, plastics, cement. Most of our pharmaceutical products are still made out of petrochemicals. All of our synthetic fiber, our power, our transport, our heat, our light, this whole civilization is made out of fossil fuels. So when oil hit $147 a barrel, purchasing power shut down all over the world because everything people were buying was too expensive, if you remember that. And the entire economic engine of the Industrial Revolution shut down in July of 2008. Everyone stopped buying. A standstill for the economy. That was the economic earthquake. The collapse of the financial market 60 days later was the aftershock. Our world leaders and our economists are still dealing with the aftershock. They haven't gotten to the earthquake. And until we do, we're losing time, precious time. We now know in the business community the outer limits of how far we can globalize this economy based on fossil fuels. It's about 150 a barrel. It's going to shut down every time. The reason is we've hit 2 milestones peak oil per capita, 1979, and global peak oil production, 2006. 1979, had we distributed all the oil, crude oil, to everyone that was alive at that moment of time, that's the most each person could have if we shared it. We found more oil since then, but population rose a lot quicker. So if we distributed all the crude oil we have now, and know we have, to 7 billion people, there's just less to go around. That's peak oil per capita, 1979, the height of the auto age. Peak oil production, now that's been controversial. That's a geological term on the Hubert bell curve. That signifies when half the oil is used up, you're at global peak oil. When that happens, it's over because we can't afford the other half. It's too expensive. It's been controversial among the geologists. And then in December 2010, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, dropped a bombshell on the business community. And we look to the IEA for all of our forecasting. The IEA, in one paragraph, said, it looks like we did peak in 2006 at 70 million barrels a day of crude oil. We're going to plateau down to 69 million barrels a day, but listen to this. It will cost us $8 trillion to get the remaining oil out in the next 20 years. So, when China and India and Southeast Asia brought a third of the human race into the game at the matured stage of the second industrial revolution, at an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% growth rate, the sheer aggregate demand of these new players against the existing reserves of crude oil was too great. Oil prices go up, all the other prices go up, purchasing power shuts down. 2009, oil went down to 30 a barrel. There was nothing going on. The economy was still stalled. As soon as we started to replenish inventories in 2010, oil goes up, 94 a barrel before the Arab Spring, 124 a barrel the first quarter of this year, and guess what's happening? We're heading to a second collapse of the global economy. And the key was to look at the quarterly statements of Unilever, Colgate-Palmolive, and BASF the first quarter. How many saw them? Tucked inside the Financial Times. Those are the Unilever and Colgate-Palmolive are the two big consumer products companies. They announced a drop in their earnings and profit, and the reason they said is the price of oil embedded in their products, as well as the packaging and the logistics, forced them to raise their prices, and now consumers are dropping their purchasing power. And BASF said the same thing in chemicals. And it's deja vu of April, May, and June of 2008. So what's happening is the stall's here, the purchasing power is shutting down, and the price of oil is going down. What we're seeing here is 5-year cycles of growth, collapse, growth, collapse. Every time we try to start the engine again, replenish inventories, we grow a little bit, then all the prices go up because of oil, and we shut down. This is going to go on for the next 25 years. There is no way to get through this wall of 125 to 150 a barrel. It cannot be done. Sooner or later, my colleagues in the economics profession and business, government, they're going to have to really understand what's going on here. In the business community, we do understand because we see the prices. This is an end game. There are other fossil fuels. We have tar sands in Canada. I know they call it oil sands now. Oh my God, branding. We have tar sands in Canada. We have heavy oil in Venezuela. We have coal deposits, and we have shale gas, but they're more expensive. If you looked at the papers today, they're hurting out in Alberta because the price of oil is now going down again, and to break even, they need somewhere between $60, but usually about $80 a barrel. And shale oil is even more expensive to get out of the ground. And of course, as we move to these more expensive and more scarce fossil fuels, it ups the bill for the industrial age CO2. This gets me to the second event of the last 4 years, Copenhagen. Our world leaders come from 192 countries to address the question of the entropy bill for the industrial age. And where are my engineers? Raise your hands. Can't escape the second law of thermodynamics. I wish you'd tell the economists this. They don't have a clue because not a single one of them, maybe a few exceptions, have ever studied the laws of thermodynamics, which parenthetically governs all economic activity. Story for another time. There's a chapter in the book on that called Retiring Adam Smith. Please take a look at it and then talk to your economist friends. So we are paying the entropy bill. This is not a metaphor. We have spewed massive amounts of carbon in the atmosphere, and now we have spent CO2, and we can't get enough of the sun's heat off the planet. And it's as simple and complex as that. So how bad is it? In the 2007 assessment report of the UN Climate Panel, at that point, the model suggested a middle scenario of 2 to 3 degrees Celsius rise in this century. That was 5 years ago, 6 years ago almost. Now, to put this in perspective, if we only go up 2 degrees to 3 degrees, that takes us back to the temperature on Earth 3 million years ago in the Pliocene, different world. And this is why what's happening to this planet is so terrifying. Climate change is all about the shift in the hydrological cycle of the Earth. That's what's never explained. We are the watery planet. All of our ecosystems, our photosynthesis, it all depends on the water regime that we have held over millions of years. For every 1 degree that the temperature goes up on the planet, the atmosphere absorbs 7% more precipitation from the ground. It just sucks it up. That means the whole water cycle of the planet is thrown off in a few short decades. More extreme winter snows, more dramatic spring floods, more prolonged summer droughts, more hurricanes, more tsunamis, more tornadoes, more earthquakes, because we're throwing the whole water cycle off. Our ecosystems adjusted to a different hydrological cycle, some over millions of years, some over hundreds of thousands of years. They can't catch up. So our ecosystems are destabilizing, and that means the plant and animal life in those ecosystems are being threatened with extinction. Our scientists tell us we are now in the 6th extinction event of the last 450 million years on our watch as a species. We are now in the 6th extinction event brought to us by us. We've had 5 wipeouts. Every time there's a mass extinction event, it comes quick. The chemistry of the planet shifts. And it takes on the average 10 million years to recover the biodiversity that's been lost, new forms of life. So now our scientists project that we're in the 6th extinction event in this century, the century of your children and grandchildren, and we could see a 70% wipeout of the species on this planet by the end of this century. As my wife says, we are walking dead. We're just asleep. Not in this room, but you know how frustrating it is. People don't want to hear it. They're in denial. Maybe it's not true. It's very, very difficult, and I understand the task in this room. Extremely difficult. So, we now have real-time climate change affecting agriculture and infrastructure. We have peak globalization at about 140 to 150 a barrel with the existing industrial revolution. What do? Let me share an anecdote with you. When Chancellor Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first few weeks of her new government to help her address the question, how do we grow the German economy and create jobs in Germany in the 21st century? Now remember, Germany is the most robust industrial economy per capita in the whole world. When I got to Berlin, the first question I asked the Chancellor is, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy, the European Union economy, the global economy in the very last stages of a great energy era in history and an entire industrial civilization based off of those energies? Austerity, we can have all the austerity in the world, and we can make cuts, but that doesn't grow an economy. We can have labor reforms and fiscal reforms and market reforms, and some of them should be integrated into the system, but that doesn't move an economy. So we have to step back and ask this, what do? We need a new economic vision for this world very quickly, and it has to be compelling. And we need a game plan for that vision that's deliverable. And it has to move as quickly in the emerging nations, even more quickly, as it is in the industrialized nations. We have to be off carbon in 30 years. Off. Not low carbon, off. Daunting task. So we need to ask the question, how do the great economic revolutions in history occur? Because it'll give us a roadmap here in the business community. The great economic revolutions occur when new energy regimes emerge, and new energy regimes make possible the bringing together of larger numbers of people so we can integrate their skills, differentiate them, and put them into larger economic units. But new energy regimes are complex, so they require new communication revolutions agile enough to manage them. If we look through history, we see that it's when communication revolutions converge with and manage new energy revolutions, those are the pivotal points in history that change the economic paradigm, the social framework, and even consciousness. I won't go back through history. I wrote an earlier book. There's the 3 books in this series. Third Industrial Revolution's out now, but some of you may have read The Empathic Civilization. It's long, 660 pages. But if you want to go back and trace communication energy revolutions in history and their impacts on society, I would recommend it. But let me go to the 19th century, give you an example. The 19th century went from manual presses, print presses, to steam-powered print pressing. So we could produce massive volumes of cheap printed material and really reduce the transaction cost. Well, then we needed to create a literacy to buy all that print material, just like now we have to understand the software to be on the internet. So we introduced public schools, and we created a print-literate workforce with the communication skills to manage a very complex, coal-powered, steam-driven first industrial revolution. And a literate workforce could not have managed that revolution. Too complicated. The 20th century, we had another convergence of communication energy, a second industrial revolution, centralized electricity, and especially the telephone. And then later, radio and television became the communication media to manage a dispersed auto, oil, and suburban culture in a mass consumer society. That second industrial revolution is dying. We can smell it. It's dying all over the world. Do not be fooled by all the new cities in the developing emerging worlds. That's second industrial revolution. It's dying. The energies are getting more expensive. Does anybody believe that any fossil fuel energies or uranium is going to get cheaper? And the technologies based on those energies, like the internal combustion engine, have exhausted their S-curve a long time ago, engineers. And now the whole infrastructure made out of carbon is more expensive to build and to mend. So, as I said to the Chancellor, how do we grow this economy? It's dying. It's on life support. Right now, and this is the fortunate news among all this dire news, we are on the cusp of a new convergence of communication energy in Europe. And soon, watch it in Asia. Europe, now soon, watch it in Asia in the next 12 months. We've had a very powerful communication revolution in the last 25 years, the personal computer and the Internet. What is so interesting about the Internet is the way it's organized. Now, I grew up, I'm probably the oldest guy here. I'm not even a baby boomer. I grew up on centralized communication.